Hi and welcome back. We're now at the 38-day mark and counting. So what are you waiting for? Let's dive in. Today we're predominantly going to be looking at Section C, the persuasive argument and language analysis. This becomes the largest differentiator within the exam, and the reason being is because nobody has ever seen the piece or pieces before. So this is a great way to show your skills off, to show your use of English language, and of course, how well you know how to critique or to analyse. So Section C. What do we need to incorporate within Section C? Well, I'm going to start off by giving you an analogy of a cake. We're going to start off with the little tiny cherry that we like to put on the cake, and that's our meta language. Now, if you know your meta language, that is, language to describe language, then absolutely you can show off by putting it in there. And we all know meta language, whether it happens to be the visual descriptors of similes or metaphors, or whether it happens to be our parts of speech, our nouns, our adjectives, our verbs, our adverbs, maybe our prepositions or our conjunctions. They're things that we can put within our analysis. Maybe we know more aspects of meta language, our sound meta language, for instance, like alliteration, like assonance and consonants, like beats and rhythms throughout. And that's our cherry on the icing on our layered cake. So let's look at our icing. What else is important, but it brings it together? And the icing is our evidential quote. So our evidentiary quote would be a word or a phrase. I would suggest not a complete sentence because you might find that there are multiple persuasive devices within each sentence. Pick a word that you think is highly persuasive or influential, or a phrase. Now, you might say to me, Louise, but there are visuals in there as well. Don't I need to incorporate the visuals? And the answer is, of course, yes. And guess what? There's meta language for visuals as well. Whether you're talking about the composition of an entire visual, or whether you're talking about the foreground or the background or a vector, these are some words that you can utilize within your analysis to show that not only you know those words, but how you can incidentally utilize them. And of course, evidence for a visual is a little bit different. Evidence for a visual means that you'll need to describe what's in there. But remember, only describe the aspect that is necessary for the persuasion and your justification of that persuasion. So let's now think about the layering in our cake, that creamy filling that we love to have within the layers of the cake. Well, there are analysing words. Analysing words like advocating or asserting, or perhaps the author is dividing the audience, or maybe bringing them together and unifying the audience. Maybe the author is wheedling or coaxing the audience to do something. Or maybe the author is condemning, or maybe condoning even. We have hundreds of these analysing words that we have at our fingertips, so let's show that we can use them. Moreover, these words can be utilised within our Section A and our Section B. What about our actual cake? Now, you might be a marble kind of swirl, chocolate vanilla kind of person. You may be a light touch of a sponge. I want to make sure that I have a clear connection with the audience and the impact or purpose on those audience members. And that becomes the bulk of my analysis. And that is the part that some students forget. Some students are so busy thinking about, oh my gosh, what's the meta language? Oh my gosh, I've got to incorporate a quote. Oh yes, it must be analysing. But you need to bring it back to the audience connection and the impact, purpose, or intent. So here's another way of showing that information. A triangle. Let's go for the middle of the triangle, the stylistic feature. For instance, the stylistic features of a speech are quite different from a blog or a review, or even a newsletter. So the stylistic features of a speech, for instance, means that you want your audience to be actively listening. And how do you do that? Well, within a speech, you'll find that there are highly repetitive aspects to it, repetitive words that are scattered throughout the piece, or sometimes even a semantic field, a group of descriptors that are really similar, that are layered throughout the piece. Why? Because speech is transient. If you've ever listened to the Birmingham Letter, or you may know it as Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, you'll notice that I have a dream is a repetitive phrase that is littered throughout this speech. And there are some great reasons for it. A, it's littered through as a constant reminder, a consistent reminder to bring the audience back to this hopeful understanding. I have a dream. It's not a reality yet, but it's an optimistic aspiration. With each one of these aspirations, then Dr. Martin Luther King was able to define what that dream represented and how it was then utilised. And so a stylistic feature of a speech is often repetition. A speech might also signpost as well. Firstly, secondly, thirdly, or I will talk about, I will be discussing. So you might like to look for those signposting cues as well. They're more explicit within a speech. So that is the essence of the stylistic features. But we now also need to think about the outside. What other beats do we need to hit? Well, we need to look at the persuasive elements. Those persuasive elements of argument structure. What is the initial opener, the initial orientation? How were the arguments arranged? And of course, what was the closer? What was that lasting ripple effect that the writer or the orator wanted to leave you with? Within that argument structure, there will be language, words and phrases that you might like to look into more deeply as well within those persuasive elements, persuasive devices. The language, you can also use your meta language in order to define what they are. And of course, we need to also incorporate the visual. Now, depending on the structure of the piece, there might be one or multiple visual. Within the exam, you only have to look at one visual, but you do have to look at the persuasive aspect of that visual. So the persuasive aspect might be structurally where it was placed within the piece, or it might be a graph that lends itself to multiple arguments within the piece. Or it might be a cartoon that again connects to multiple aspects of the piece. A cliched response for a student will be leaving the visual until the penultimate paragraph, the second to last paragraph, and to analyse that visual in an entire paragraph. Keener students will find ways of filtering it through, looking back to how the author has intentionally structured their piece, how the author has intentionally utilised persuasive language, and of course, the persuasive element of the visual and why it was intentionally there. And then, of course, how it connects to the audience. And you can be specific with that audience. Yes, you can say the listener. Yes, you can say the reader. But you can be even more specific, especially if it was within the background information. But I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the last part, the purpose, the impact, or the intent upon that audience. Now, it's this aspect that students forget about, but it's the most important aspect because it really closes that triangle off. What is the purpose of utilizing that argument structure, and how does it create a connection with the audience? What's the impact of that language choice upon the audience? Or indeed, what is the intent of the visual on the audience? So you may like to utilize this triangle. What I'd like you to do is look at the big picture today. We're going to look at the big picture of the argument structure. I'd like you to go to the VCAA website and to either print off these, or you may have it on a computer in front of you, whatever makes you feel more comfortable. These web addresses will also be placed within the info as well. Now, it's a great idea to have a system. Humans love patterns and they love symmetry as well. So look for a system. Now, this might be a system that works for you, or you might like to alter the system so that your system works for you. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by reading the background information. Now, the background information could incorporate 4 aspects. It always includes the context, because that's what background information is. So what incited this debate or this argument. It will often give you the publication details as well as the style of the piece. Some other aspects that it might also incorporate is the audience, or it might even give you the contention or sub-contentions, the argument or the sub-argument. Now, after you've read the background information, read the persuasive piece or pieces and read for comprehension. It is really important that you take a big step backwards first and look at the entirety of the piece before you start picking it apart. Otherwise, you might find that you pick apart persuasive elements within every sentence. Then you're going to read the persuasive piece for comprehension. It's really important to take a big step backwards and look at the entirety of the piece. Remember the question: how is the author intentionally crafting their argument? Look for the opener, yes. Look for the contention, yes. Look for the different arguments that are there, and of course look for the closer, but more importantly, read for comprehension. You need to know the entirety of the piece before you can start looking at the minutiae or the small pieces of the individual aspects of persuasion. Then go back and reread the background for the argument, and then that will help really hone yourself in. Grab all your different colored highlighters. I suggest you have at least 6 different colored highlighters. With each one of your different highlighter, you're going to underline a section in the piece. Start off by looking at the opening orientation and draw a line underneath that. As soon as you think it stops being the opener and goes into the first argument, draw a line underneath. Now remember, your line may be different from somebody else's line, and that's absolutely a-okay. It's all about your interpretation. So please don't second guess yourself. Get straight in, read what you think is the opening orientation, and then put a line underneath. Then put that colored highlighter down. Pick up a different colored highlighter, and for each one of the arguments that you see, draw a line underneath the argument, put that colored highlighter down, and pick up a new colored highlighter until you've used however many you think the arguments are. Now, there might be economic arguments. There might be a classic versus contemporary argument. There might be an argument about the environment, or there could be an argument about how you should behave or how other people should behave. Look for those arguments. And as soon as you think that argument is done and a new one has started, draw a line underneath. Keep a separate color for your closer. Now, the closer might be a couple of paragraphs. It could even be one sentence. But keep a separate color for it, because this is an intriguing way where you don't end up having to write a conclusion. But keep in mind, how did the author intentionally craft their art? Now, you've got 2 pieces in front of you. You're going to give yourself 2 lots of 30 minutes today. 1 lot for each one of those pieces. And you're going to go through the system. Read the background information, read the entirety of the piece for comprehension, and then go back to the background information before picking up your colored highlighters to look for argument structure. The argument structure of the opening orientation, what's the in each one of those arguments, and then of course, what's the closer? How have they left a lasting impression that will ripple through as a speech or ripple through the reader so that they alter their perception? Use each one of these colors to highlight your world, to enlighten and to brighten your world. And as always, give yourself an active 10-minute break in the middle and at the end as a reward. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Beth. I know that Beth is working so hard at the moment, and I wanted to congratulate her, and I wanted to say, keep up the great work. See you next time.